the Austrian Bundesliga, the way that it's run is perfect in terms of their hierarchy, bringing youth through and supporting the kind of local community in football. And I believe we could do that in an ambitious way.
That's a great point, Glenn. I take on board exactly what you say. It feels, I'll just speak on behalf of the German Bundesliga. Einigkeit mit Recht und Freiheit für das deutsche Vaterland. Yeah. But spot on, we need a proper licensing system. Yes, yeah, das ist good, jawohl. But I think it feels a little bit like when I speak to you about these things, it's online, and we've got to do this, it feels a little bit like Lord of the Rings here. Middle Earth sort of rising here, there's going to be some big conflict here with the EFL. And I think it'd be a great thing for the football supporting world to crowdfund, to finance some, you know, well-intentioned, very knowledgeable lawyers to finance and to go and attack the EFL on some form of civil matter if we could do. Let's look at it, but it's absolutely great. But I better pass you back to Tim, or else we'll be here all day. But
Like the 25 million.
yeah, great input, but yeah.
What we know about the 25 million is we understand that it's not a fiction. What I understand, based on the inquiries I've undertaken, is that if that offer were to be actually materialise into an actual loan, because obviously in commercial world you may get some form of offer letter which says we will lend you this amount of money, but there'll be all sorts of conditions attached. Nobody lends £25 million. Well, it'll be 30, obviously, because we understand it's the same organisation that made the first £5 million loan. There'll be all sorts of conditions and terms and securities to be provided, and therefore it's effectively conditional. And it may say you've got to produce revenue projections and things like this. So it's not a fiction. It's not something that's cropped up in the last day or two. It's understood that this offer letter perhaps was available at least a week before last Monday's hearing. It's understood that it contains an interest rate at 1.5% per month. What that means is, in practice, is if you consolidate it with the 5 million and assume that you would the whole thing will be refinanced as one, which doesn't have to be done like that, but it would be logical. That there will be £450,000 per month interest paid if that interest rate is as we've been told.
Do you believe he could make that?
Well, you've got to. I mean, when you bear in mind that Blackpool Football Club, we've got to see their accounts have to be filed by the end of this month. But let's say conservatively they lost 2 million. So that means roughly, in round figures, about £180,000–200,000 per month that Blackpool Football Club is losing at the moment because of not a penny more and matters like that. There is effectively going to have to be something in the region of £650,000 per month found to service that loan without making any capital repayments, and to continue owning the football club. Now, I would say that's unsustainable. You look at you can't take in the income stream from Blackpool because you've already netted that. You've already netted the £2 million loss off against that, and then you look around at the other Oyston businesses, and with the best one in the world, I don't think any of them are producing revenue streams that would allow for that loan to be serviced. So the only way you can then service it by selling assets. So if there's a benefit to Owen in doing it, and I think the fact that he hasn't already done it tells a story. But if there is an advantage in doing it, is it would allow him to better manage the disposal of his assets than if Valeri's just allowed to cherry pick what he wants to seize. I refer to it as the death by 1,000 cuts, because you don't know where the next cut's coming from, but you know it's going to be painful. But it would allow him to better manage the assets. But the cost to him and to the Oyston businesses of servicing that debt in the meantime will be crippling, in my view. So I don't think it's a fiction. I don't think it's a particularly palatable solution for the Oystons. And even if they do it, I think we've got to bear in mind is that it isn't the end of the story, because no business, certainly not one operating at the levels that Blackpool is, can possibly carry on beyond the short term with that type of debt round its neck. So I would still like to think that it would still be a case of them being vulnerable to being forced into a situation to sell. It may be a short-term putting a plaster over a deep wound. I think that's the way I would look at it.
Tim, may I just ask, please, we're talking about an interest rate every month, but generally with these loans, is there also a time limit where the amount itself has to be paid back?
It could be it could just be like an all monies charge. What that means is that the loan secures whatever amount's outstanding at any one time, and it can be called in on demand. So it may be called in if a payment's missed. It may be called in just in any event because the the lender has decided that they want to bring the relationship to an end. So most of us come across large loans in the context of the mortgages in our houses. But if you have a mortgage on a commercial business, it's more likely it would be that type of arrangement where it could be called in at any time. And you might have sometimes heard about banks calling in loans. I think Yorkshire Bank were at it for a while around here, weren't they? Because they just didn't want certain types of business on the books anymore. It was just a strategic decision. So they call in, and it causes you all sorts of problems because unless you can refinance with somebody else quite quickly, you really are in serious trouble, and you face the prospect of enforcement action being taken against the properties that you've given security for, which in this case I think will be pretty much everything in the Oyston portfolio. So I don't think it would be time limited is the short answer, but we don't know. It could be 5 years, but if they're going to have to make capital repayments as well as interest, then which I don't think they will have to, but if they did, it would obviously those payments I've spoken about will go up tremendously.
How do we know Oyston got a load of money doshed away overseas? What impact would that be for any dodgy?
The short answer is we don't, do we? Nobody knows. All I can say is it didn't seem to have a wad of cash available to pay the first payment. He didn't pay the second payment, knowing that it would have very draconian implications, which obviously came to pass. You know, maybe he thought he could sweet talk. If he thought he could sweet talk Marcus Smith, then gosh, he really is away. Yeah.
So he'll do anything I think to keep that club.
Yeah.
There's this rumour out this 25 million unsecured loan for a Middle East mystery man. I mean,
well,
rumour mill thrives,
the rumour mill will always be rife. The £25 million that I believe has been actually offered to him is from the same organisation who provided that £5 million towards the first payment.
Yeah, well, that was in this country, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But we don't know about this.
There is always the possibility of him raising money elsewhere, but people don't lend others 25 million without there being something in it for them. I mean, rich people aren't rich by being overly generous. They generally, it's because they're very switched on, they know what they're doing, and they're looking for what they can get out of it. There aren't sugar daddies out there just ready to write out a cheque for 25 million for anybody, I wouldn't think.
It's just one thing.
But the thing is, at the end of the day, we're Blackpool fans. Most of the people in this room are Blackpool fans for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. We are by nature pessimists, aren't we? And we're always looking for the worst possible angle. The fact of the matter is, A, we never thought that Valeria would get a judgment for this amount. Secondly, we always felt that the Oystons would have the money to pay, and the evidence so far is that they don't, and it's causing friction within the family. So if we look at where we are now as against where we were 2 years ago, or even 12 months ago before the Manchester decision, we couldn't envisage a scenario as good as it is. The difficulty we've got is we're dealing with somebody who seems, and there's a variety of explanations as to why it might be, somebody who seems determined to keep hold of the football club at any cost, and even if it means causing division within his own family. So that's a scenario which I think is probably unique in this country. You know, when we've dealt with Charlton and Coventry and all these other clubs who are, we keep hearing about, Orient are sorted. Charlton are meant to be getting sorted now, and Pompey got sorted. Ours just seems to go on and on and on, and it's basically down to one man who he says he loves Blackpool, but the reality is he just loves owning Blackpool, and they're not the same thing.
Do we think the family could turn on him and declare him unfit?
Got to be careful what we say, haven't we? But there have been a few suggestions that, but at the end of the day, anybody who was in London so Owen was on the stand for 3 days. He knows what he's doing. In my view, we might not agree with it. His family might not agree with it, but he's stubborn. I think, and stubbornness is a trait that it doesn't mean that you don't know what you're doing, or that somebody can take some action, suggest you know what you're doing. At the end of the day, he wants to keep hold of that football club, and he's entitled to try. It's our job and Valeri's job, and hopefully, eventually, his family's job to persuade him otherwise.
So I'll come to you. Could he put all his assets into the loan, and then when he snuffs it, the company gets everything?
That's possible. I mean, so if this loan is charged over all the assets, and then in the scenario, if he passes, what happens then? Well, of course, the lender is going to want all his money back. But we don't know what the value of the assets would be on realisation. But it is theoretically possible that, as a consequence of the interest rate accumulating, I mean, in reality, I would say the borrowing should stay roughly the same, because the lender's going to want the interest in the meantime, and if the interest isn't paid, it will be added to the debt, but they're not going to let that go on forever and a day, in my view, because they want a commercial return on their investment. And there may be some penalty interest rates that apply in the event of default as well. It's not beyond the bounds of possibility. There's a higher interest rate kicks in if a payment's missed. So, yeah, it could happen, but I mean, I think that's what's causing the division within the family, because obviously the family don't want to see all the assets hopped to the eyeballs to try and keep hold of a football club that isn't making any money. That's you can only guess that's the cause of the division, and it's the logical guess, isn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say all the focus seems to be on Owen. Does this mean that Carl's sort of wriggled out of any obligations, gets to keep his gun and his £2 a week?
Well, did everybody hear the question about where does this leave Carl as he effectively wriggled off the hook? I mean, Carl is jointly and severally liable for the debt. What that means is that they're both responsible for the lot, and in between themselves, if one ends up paying more than the other, they can ask the others to contribute separately. But obviously, a successful claimant will chase the money where they think they've got the best chance of getting it. Now, on the basis of the witness statement that Carl put into the court proceedings, he was suggesting that the level of assets in his own name were limited to a rather expensive gun and a quad bike, I think, was the suggestion. Whether that's right or wrong, I believe that's what he said, or that's what came out in court. That's what he said. If he was on. He talks about needing £2 a week to live on, but he's not. He's been sacked from the football club. So whether he still gets an income from the football club now, I don't know. But he's obviously married to a very rich lady in her own right. So we're speculating about things really we don't know enough about. But he's not off the hook. But the reality is, Valeri isn't going to get much by chasing him. He's going to get his money by chasing Suggesta's assets, Suggesta as it was, and chasing Owen, because they're the ones who hold they're the ones who own bricks and mortar, and they're the ones who are more likely to be able to pay him.
So effectively, by sacking him from various companies, it's probably giving him an outlet.
Well, I don't know. I don't see it as Carl being given an outlet. I just think. I I think Carl was never going to be the one who was going to bear the brunt of this.
No,
It was always
no, but we want him to suffer.
we may, but at the end of the day, I think most of us just want a scenario to be engineered that gets us Blackpool Football Club back, and that involves targeting Owen, because Owen's the one who holds the purse strings. Yep.
Yeah, 2 questions, Tim. One simple. In Carl McGrath's email, was there any indication that the 13 offers would achieve the £10 million?
Was there any suggestion what?
He said there was 13 offers made. Carl said that when he pulled the rug out of his dad, from his dad's feet, he said there had been 13 offers made. Was there any indication that that would achieve the £10 million?
I don't think we know. Again, I wasn't in court that particular day, but mine. It wasn't. So it was 13 different offers on assets. There might have been more than one offer on one particular asset. So, for instance, you might have had 5 on the Travelodge. The Travelodge has a certain attraction because of its rental yield, how much rent it's producing. Because effectively, if somebody does buy it, during the term of the lease, they would get all the purchase money back and more, and still own the freehold at the end. So there may be, like, for instance, five offers on that. We know there's been one on Oyston Mill at 1.2 million, I think, because that had it on the first time we went to auction, didn't it? There was an offer on, although it came after the court hearing, there was an offer on Queen Street at 880. If we accept that there wasn't somebody trying to bump the price up.
They claimed there was an imminent deal for the Travelodge for
9.7 million on the Travelodge. Obviously, whether that involved repaying the 5 million, or whether they had a word with Charles Street Investments and said, "Will you release that? But we'll give you another asset." So there's ways of doing it where the whole of the 9.7 million would go towards paying the judgment. So
that stacks up, because I watched that auction when Queen Street came up, and all those properties seem to be selling as if a 7% return.
Yeah.
So your 900,000 at 7% gives you the 600,000-ish that the rental income was. So that probably stacks up.
Yeah. Okay. Any second question?
The second was, is it feasible that Valeri might turn Clifford Chance against the EFL?
Valeri, my understanding is that Valeri's lawyers have already been in contact with the EFL. They haven't actually yet issued the application that would be needed. I think, again, I'm going back to Wednesday, I said there's an easy way of doing this with the EFL and there's a tough way. The easy way is for the EFL to say, we hear what you say based on the representations made. We'll read that judgment. We can see that you were trying to do the right thing in 2010, 2012. We hear what Marcus Smith has to say about the Kyrgyzstani decision. We've looked at the decision ourselves. We know it was done when you've not been involved. We know they won't. I don't know what Clifford Chance have said to them, but let's say Clifford Chance have said, we've tried to get an appeal date through 4 times, 5 times, and they won't list it, which in general terms is what I understand. They could just say, we're lifting the automatic ban because we're satisfied it's not appropriate. I've said this before, there's nothing wrong with the EFL rule on this particular point. It's how they apply it when the particular facts of a case are put to them. Because it's got to be right that if somebody gets a conviction for 12 months or more, which is the qualifying conviction, that they should be viewed as not fit and proper to own a football club. But the rules can never envisage what happens with this bizarre decision in Kyrgyzstan that's done in absentia, that seems to be politically motivated. So that's when they should then say we're going to apply our discretion and lift it. But as we understand this at the moment, they won't. So Valeri's next step, if he's minded to take it, is to issue proceedings against the EFL. And it goes before a special arbitration panel, as I understand it, under the rules, a 3-man arbitration panel, and he has to fight his corner. But that could cost hundreds of thousands of pounds. It could take quite a long time. Could take, I don't know what the time scale is. It could be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. And during that period, he remains banned as it stands at the moment, unless they were minded to lift it in the meantime. And linked to that, we've obviously got the point that, you know, if he's going to spend that type of money and he doesn't end up with Blackpool at the end of all this, then it's money that is just down the drain effectively. So he's got to do an assessment, and I believe he will be doing an assessment very shortly as regards whether that's the appropriate route to go down. What I'd like to see is fans, you know, really try and leverage EFL in the meantime to do what I think is the right and proper thing, which is not to make him go through all those hoops in relation to what is, you know, from my perspective, a conviction from a kangaroo court.
Do you think he's really interested in knowing the club?
I know he's interested in knowing the club. I don't think. So, he will. We've had BST and myself, and at different stages, have had a number of meetings with him. During every one of those meetings, he's reinforced his commitment to Blackpool. He doesn't promise things he can't deliver, so you won't hear him say too much because he can't promise that he'll end up with a football club, because it's not something that actually he may have a big influence, but he doesn't actually control. The only person who controls who owns Blackpool Football Club at the moment are two organisations. One of them is Suggester, who owns Blackpool FC, which Owen controls, and the other one is the EFL, potentially. Because if the EFL don't lift that ban, it doesn't matter what Valeri wants to do, he can't do it. But in every meeting he's ever had with us, he's always reinforced his desire. It's going back a bit now, but he gave a very detailed interview to Jack Gorn when Jack Gorn went to Riga. If anybody is any doubt as to what Valeri thinks of Blackpool or what he wants to do, just reread that. It's still on the internet. Go back and read it, because I tell you what, he says in there what he wants to do, and he's reinforced it since, both when we've had discussions with him and or his representatives at court, and in any discussions, you know, we are in regular contact with Latvia, and the statement that was issued on Wednesday, Thursday, whenever it was, didn't say a lot, but what it did say for me was meaningful, in that, you know, he talked about envisaging there being regime change and things getting better, and for me that's the hint. Well, it's more than a hint. It's effectively saying, you know, I want what's best for Blackpool Football Club. He's already said he's not going to take enforcement action that puts the football club at risk, because we are in a very precarious position at the moment, and I believe the game's going on today. And you know, we don't want to. The best will in the world, if there is going to be a regime change, we don't really want to be back in League Two. We want to be, you know, keeping Division 1 status, because we all hope there's going to be change sooner rather than later. But it's Owen is what it pivots on, and clearly he's clinging on for dear life at the moment.
Thank you. So
I'll come to. Yeah, the question was, what about Valeri's brother, who owns our half VB football assets? My understanding is that he'll be viewed as what we call a connected person.
So how does that then carry over to the Oyston scenario? Because the rest of the Oyston family are connected to Owen, who's banned.
Yeah, well, Owen isn't banned.
Is he not?
Because the rules came in after his conviction. Because of the nature of the conviction, I don't think it ever gets spent. But the rules weren't retrospective. But I think they originally asked for an undertaking, didn't they? That he wouldn't be involved in the day-to-day running the football club, which was given. But again, we come back to this opaque organisation. They don't really seem to be the policemen that they need to be of their own football clubs. They just seem to be there to represent their interests. So when it comes out in court that Owen had been at, was it 33 of 34 board meetings, that's not somebody who's not taking an active role. So so the short answer is I don't think Valeri's brother offers an option, because he'd be viewed as a connected person. Otherwise, everybody would just say, you know, I'm banned. I'll put my wife in, or I'll put my brother in, or I'll put my son in, or whatever it might be. So I think they would object. And most certainly, I think Blackpool used that as an excuse for not having Normans replace him on the board when Valeri resigned. So who was the question down here?
With all these liabilities he's now got, and the debts that the football club have got, where's he going to get the money from to put into the football club to run the football club? surely at some point it's going to go bust, isn't it?
Yeah, but the only way is to sell assets piecemeal to pay the instalments as they go along. So obviously they've got a portfolio of assets. They could sell Queen Street for 880,000. That would cover 2 months' instalments of the loan. They then have to sell something else. Because I don't see where the revenue streams come from to service that type of debt. And that's again why not a penny more becomes very important, because the less money that's going into the football club, the more Oyston assets are having to be used to actually support this failing regime.
In some respects, though, is that not playing into our hands? Because if the club goes, but it doesn't go bust, and it goes either the receivers or administrators' money, and then does that not then take out of Oyston's hands who buys it if we get to that scenario?
If a receiver or there's two receivers and administrators are two different things. An administrator would only come in the event of insolvency. Owen could put the football club into administration, but he runs the risk of him losing control. So I doubt he would do that. Of course, that would carry with it a 12-point deduction as well. The appointment of a receiver has nothing to do with insolvency, wouldn't lead to a points deduction, but it brings it with this uncertainty about how it would be run in the meantime. It's a little bit like an administrator going in. It's done in a very, very similar way, but not insolvency. That's the only difference.
With that respect, though, with Valeri knowing all the ins and outs of the club, was he not then in a prime position to say, I'll take the club as is?
Yeah, but it would. I think it would have to be at least offered up for sale, and he would be competing against any other potential bidder.
Yeah, but again, there he holds all the cards.
He does, because he can, as long as whilst he's offsetting what he's owed, he can just bid as if he wants to. Anybody else? Anybody else? Have we covered everything?
Referring back to the courts, on behalf of the members, I'd like to thank the court reporters for a fantastic job. Brilliant.
Yeah. I think that's a round of applause for the court reporters. I must admit, when the process started, I mean, we started off with I think we have about 15 or 20 people on the Justice for Fans link, don't we? And we were going to share it all around, but somebody's ended up doing such a good job that none of us think we can live up to it. So Robbie's done a fantastic job, and then what we also have is, which has been great as well, is that somebody, I won't put any names into the fray, but somebody obviously takes responsibility for operating the Twitter account as well, sorry, the AVFTT account, and we also have the TKs as well doing a great job on Twitter at the same time. So whichever social media you use on the day of the hearings, it's fascinating because you're getting all these updates coming from all these different places, and it's almost like being there, isn't it? It really is. So it's been fantastic, and they are there. You can go back and look at it. I know Clifford Chance read it on the way home on the train, and they've commended us on the accuracy of the reporting. I know that I know for definite Latvia read all the forums and keep very, very abreast of what's going on. So these things are used not just by us, but also by people involved in the court process as well. I'm sure Clifford Chance won't be relying on our notes, but they do read them. That's all I can say. They definitely do read them.
EFL follow it as well?
Yeah, I think they may well do. Well, if they don't, they should be doing. Anybody else before I hand over? Have we covered everything?
Can I just ask one last question? Sorry to be.
Yeah, no problem.
This 25 million loan, if there's an extra 2 or 3 or 4 million outstanding, can he object to that? Then the assets being used to cover that loan because there's still outstanding monies. Because as it stands at the minute, it's all protected, isn't it? It's all frozen. So if he can't, the judge has dictated that everything's due now.
Yes.
So that would then leave. Would he have to borrow that extra amount to clear it off?
No, I think what he would do is he would go initially to Valeri and say, I've got a loan for 25 million. I will give you that 25 million in consideration for the terms of the injunction being relaxed to allow security to be put on this asset, that asset, and that asset. And obviously, Clifford Chance would say, right, well, that's fine as long as the money comes direct to us. A little bit like when you buy and sell your house. If you sell a house and you've got a mortgage on it, your solicitors negotiate a release of the mortgage in consideration for a promise to send the money to your mortgage company to pay off your mortgage. And that's how the whole system works. And in it's the easiest way I can explain it, it would work in a very, very similar way. If Valeri, which I know I've heard, why doesn't Valeri just object and say, I'm steaming him for the 25 and sod your loan, I'm not interested? The short answer is, Owen could then go to the court and say, Valeri's been unreasonable. I'm actually trying to pay him his 25 million that he's roughly, because he's owed probably somewhere between 25 and 27. I'm trying to pay him his 25 million back and he won't take it. Now, the court will step in then and whether we like it or not, and say that's unreasonable.